You think you know the person sleeping next to you? You think 7 years of building an empire together means something. But when my husband, our CEO, looked at me across a room packed with 200 employees and said those words, I realized I was just an inconvenient detail in his story. He forgot one thing. I was not just a detail. I own the story. My name is Eliza Vance, and I am the head of strategic client relations at Aperture Dynamics. Or at least, I was. The quarterly all-hands meeting was standard procedure. The conference room in our Boston headquarters was packed, the collective body heat of 200 employees warring with the aggressive industrial air conditioning. I stood near the back, my arms crossed, watching my husband, Marcus Vance, command the stage. He was a natural CEO, charismatic, sharp, dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than my first car, and standing right next to him, close enough that their shoulders brushed, was Sloane Garrett. Sloane was the new VP of marketing, recruited 6 months ago from a New York competitor. She was all sharp angles and sharper ambition, and she wore a perfume so expensive it seemed to suck the oxygen from the air around her. I knew that scent intimately. I smelled it on my husband's shirts, a cloying, invasive sweetness that clung to the fabric long after he'd sworn his late-night strategy sessions were just work. Marcus was clicking through a presentation, his voice booming with corporate optimism. And as we look to Q4, we're implementing structural changes to optimize performance. A familiar tension settled over the room. Structural changes was executive speak for layoffs. People shifted in their seats. Sloane leaned in and whispered something in Marcus's ear. It was a fluid, intimate gesture. She smiled, a quick flash of white teeth, and then stepped back. Marcus nodded, his expression hardening from visionary leader to stern executioner. His eyes scanned the crowd, bypassing managers and junior staff, until they found me. They locked onto mine. There was no flicker of recognition, no shared history, no hint of the man who had kissed me goodbye that very morning. There was only the cold, impersonal gaze of a boss. And that, he said, his voice dropping slightly but carrying perfectly in the heavy silence, starts with accountability. I felt a prickle of unease. The air from the vent above blasted my face, chilling the sudden dampness on my neck. Eliza, he said. He used my name like a weapon. We've reviewed a formal complaint from Sloane's department. I blinked. Sloane's department I watched as Sloane arranged her features into a mask of reluctant concern. It seems, Marcus continued, that you've been undermining our new product launch strategy by contacting clients privately. The breath caught in my chest. It felt like a physical blow. The clients. He was talking about my clients. The ones I had brought in. The relationships I had cultivated for over a decade, long before Marcus had ever worn the CEO title. The clients who were the foundation of this entire company. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me. I kept my spine straight. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Until the investigation is complete, Marcus declared, his voice ringing with finality. You are suspended, effective immediately. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, broken only by the hum of the projector. 200 people held their breath at once. Then, the whispers started, a sibilant rush of sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Please turn over your security badge and laptop to IT on your way out. He dismissed me, in front of everyone, in front of her. I looked past him, just for a second, and caught Sloane's eye. She was looking right at me. The mask of concern was gone, replaced by a tiny, almost imperceptible smile of triumph. It was a victor's smile. I forced my gaze back to Marcus. I held it, pouring every ounce of ice in my veins into that single look. I watched the tiny muscle feather in his jaw, the only sign that he was human at all. I willed my hands not to tremble. I would not cry. I would not shout. I would not beg. I gave him only one word. Fine. I turned, my posture perfect. I did not hurry. I walked out of that conference room, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, sealing me off from the life I had built. The sound of my heels on the polished marble floor of the hallway was sharp and loud in the appalling silence. Each click was a strike, a beat, a promise, one step after another, walking away from my husband and toward my revenge. My hands were steady on the wheel, a stark contrast to the tremor I had suppressed in that boardroom. I did not drive toward the gleaming penthouse in Back Bay that I shared with Marcus. I did not go home. Instead, I navigated the winding cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill, the old, quiet heart of Boston. The gas lamps were not yet lit, but the afternoon shadows were long. I parked in front of a narrow brick building, its brass nameplate polished but ancient. This was where the real power resided. Aperture Dynamics was not Marcus's creation. He was not the genius founder the business magazines loved to feature. The company was born from the mind of my father, David Shaw. My father was a brilliant, quiet strategist. He built Aperture Dynamics from nothing, not with charisma, but with relentless logic and an uncanny ability to see 5 moves ahead. He was my hero. And Marcus, fresh out of business school, was his star pupil. Marcus was everything my father was not: dazzling, ambitious, and hungry for the spotlight. I saw his drive, and my father saw his potential. I fell in love with that ambition, with the way he looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered, even more than the company. We were a team: David, Marcus, and me. Then, 7 years ago, my father died. A sudden, brutal heart attack stole him from us, from me. And just like that, at 31, I inherited everything. The entire company, all of it, was mine. But I was drowning in grief. I never wanted to be the face of Aperture. My father's legacy was in the code, in the client relationships I had started building even in college, not in shareholder meetings or press releases. Marcus, however, thrived on that. He held me as I cried, and he talked about the future, about our future. He said he would protect our legacy. So I agreed to a deal, a structure. I appointed Marcus as chief executive officer. It made sense. He had the drive, and I had the name. My controlling interest, the 51% of the company my father left me, was moved. We transferred it into a quiet parent corporation, a holding company we named E.M. Holdings. Eliza and Marcus. It sounded like a promise. I became the silent majority shareholder. I took a mid-level role, head of strategic client relations. It was the part of the business I loved, the part that still felt like my father. I stayed on the ground floor while Marcus took the penthouse office. For 7 years, it worked. Marcus ran the company. He expanded it. He gave the interviews. He accepted the awards. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the narrative changed. David Shaw, the quiet founder, became a footnote. The new story, the one Marcus told, was about the genius of Marcus Vance, the man who transformed a small firm into a powerhouse. I let it happen. I was in love. I was busy managing the clients who paid our bills. I told myself the story did not matter as long as the work, my father's work, was safe. I believed my love was safe. I had been a fool. I had willingly given him the stage, and he had become so comfortable under the spotlight that he forgot who had built it. He forgot that the foundation he was standing on, the one he was so eager to redesign with Sloan, was built by my father, and that it was owned by me. The first hairline crack in our shared foundation appeared 6 months ago. Its name was Sloan Garrett. Marcus had recruited her personally from a major competitor in New York, presenting her to the executive team as our new vice president of marketing, a game changer for the Aperture brand. She was undeniably sharp. She was also glamorous in a way that felt like a weapon, and possessed an ambition so naked it was almost brutal. From the moment she walked in, she didn't look at me as the CEO's wife, or even as the head of strategic clients. She looked at me like I was a fossil, a charming relic from a bygone era, a piece of sentimental furniture that cluttered up her sleek, modern vision. The exclusion started slowly, a death by 1,000 paper cuts. I was accidentally left off an email chain for a key strategy meeting. Then, a scheduling conflict mysteriously moved a vital client overview to a time I was already booked on a flight. When I asked my assistant, Ben, to follow up, he came back frustrated. Sloan had taken over the scheduling, insisting the meeting was high-level executive only. I overheard her talking to Marcus one evening through his slightly open home office door. I stood frozen in the hallway, the ice in my glass chilling my hand. She's just too emotional about the legacy clients, darling. Sloane's voice purred. She doesn't get the new vision. We need to be agile, not sentimental. Her relationships are holding us back. Darling. The word hit me like a slap. In the beginning, Marcus offered a weak defense. Eliza built those relationships. Sloan. I heard him argue, his voice lacking conviction. They are the company. But Sloan was relentless. She was always in his office, always at his side, laughing at his jokes, praising his boldness, and always subtly, painting me as the past. Gradually, Marcus's defenses of me crumbled. He started using her vocabulary. Eliza, we have to think about the new vision, he would say in our own kitchen, parroting her words. The we he used had shifted. It no longer included me. Then came the physical evidence, the cliché, textbook signs of an affair, the late-night work dinners that stretched past 1 a.m., the sudden, urgent weekend business trips. Sloan and I have to fly to Chicago, baby, he announced one Friday, already packing an overnight bag. This client is threatening to jump. Chicago. Our regional office there is tiny, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Let me come. I know their procurement head, David Allen, personally. No, he said quickly, not meeting my eyes. It's a marketing play, a branding emergency. You stay here, hold down the fort. He came home Sunday night reeking of her. That perfume, the one that seemed to suck the oxygen out of every room, was all over his suit jacket. It was a territorial scent marker. I finally confronted him. It was a Tuesday night. He had just walked in the door at 2 a.m., and the smell of her was overwhelming. You smell like her, Marcus. He didn't flinch. He just sighed, the deep, put-upon sigh of a man burdened by an emotional wife. Eliza, do not start this. I'm exhausted. We were in a war room meeting until an hour ago. A war room, is that what you're calling it now? He threw his keys onto the marble countertop, the sound sharp and angry. You know what this right here is the problem, this insecurity, this paranoia. It's why Sloan is getting traction with the board, and you're not. You're supposed to be a leader, not my suspicious wife. It's not a good look. He gaslighted me. He twisted my correct intuition into professional jealousy. He made his betrayal my failure. After that night, the personal humiliation bled directly into my work. The respect Marcus had always shown me in public vanished, replaced by a cold impatience. Sloan, sensing the complete power shift, became brazen. In a full leadership meeting, I presented a retention strategy for our top 5 clients, the very accounts that formed the bedrock of our revenue. Before I had even finished my second slide, Sloan cut me off, holding up a hand. With all due respect, Eliza, that feels very dated, she said, addressing the room. Not me. Our data suggests an aggressive new acquisition model. We can't be held hostage by these legacy relationships. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to intervene, to defend the very clients who paid for his custom suits and her trips to Chicago. He just nodded, looking at Sloan with open admiration. The data is compelling. Sloan, let's explore that path. Good work. He never made eye contact with me. He hadn't just chosen her over me in our marriage. He had chosen her over me in my father's boardroom. I sat there, invisible, my presentation still frozen on the screen. It was then I knew, with chilling certainty, that my partner was gone. Marcus had found a new teammate, and I was now just the opposition. The fog of humiliation and pain had begun to clear the moment I stepped onto the cobblestones of Beacon Hill. Now, sitting in Arthur Davenport's office, it was gone completely, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The office was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood when I would wait for my father, all dark mahogany, leather-bound books, and the ticking of a grandfather clock. Arthur Davenport, my father's confidant and the executor of his will, was a man in his 70s with a spine as rigid as the law books lining his shelves. He was the manager of E.M. Holdings. He stared at the laptop on his desk, his face grim. On the screen, the scene from the boardroom played out in grainy, slightly shaky footage. My assistant, Ben, a smart, ambitious young man who owed his career to a scholarship my father had endowed, had recorded the entire thing on his phone. He had suspected something was coming. We watched Marcus's cold delivery. We watched Sloane's triumphant smirk. We watched my public execution. Arthur pressed the space bar, and the image of Marcus, arrogant and dismissive, froze on the screen. Arthur turned his gaze to me. It was not pity I saw in his eyes. It was a quiet, assessing anger. "Your father," he said, his voice a gravelly baritone, "foresaw this, not the specifics, not the tawdry affair, but the arrogance. He always said Marcus was brilliant, but that his ambition lacked a rudder." He reached for a thick, leather-bound portfolio from his credenza. The gold lettering on the spine was faded E.M. Holdings. "David was a cautious man," Arthur continued, opening the portfolio. "He built in a fail-safe, a provision for the day when Marcus might forget, as he put it, whose name is actually on the deed. He called it the disloyalty clause." I leaned forward. I had a vague recollection of this, a discussion mired in the fog of grief 7 years ago. Arthur had handled the details. I had just signed where he told me. Arthur laid the document flat. "The clause is quite specific. It stipulates that in the event you, Eliza Shaw Vance, as the indirect founder and principal beneficiary, are subjected to punitive action such as suspension or dismissal by the acting CEO, without just cause and without adherence to proper corporate bylaws." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "Then the CEO's right to vote by proxy on behalf of the shares held by E.M. Holdings is immediately and irrevocably revoked. The full voting power reverts to you." The air left my lungs in a silent rush. "He just handed it all back to me." "He just handed it all back to you," Arthur confirmed, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "He did the one thing your father bet his arrogance would eventually make him do. He overplayed his hand." "Does he know?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Does Marcus know this clause exists?" Arthur shook his head, a dry, humorless smile touching his lips. "He signed it 7 years ago. He was so giddy at the time, so focused on the CEO title and the new letterhead, that he barely glanced at the holding company's incorporation details. He saw E.M. Holdings as a legal formality, a dusty old trust fund he didn't need to worry about. He never read the fine print. He had been too busy planning his acceptance speech to read the terms of his surrender. All this time, Marcus thought he was the king, wielding the power of my 51% stake. He never realized he was just a steward, one who had just spectacularly failed the loyalty test." I looked at the frozen image of my husband on the laptop screen. The man who had called me paranoid, insecure, and dated. The man who had tried to break me in front of 200 people. I stood up, the leather of the chair groaning in protest. The hurt was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was the ice. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, clear, and cold, "I want you to schedule an emergency meeting of the board of directors." Arthur was already picking up his phone. "When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp." I walked to the window, looking down at the quiet street, at the old Boston brick that had stood for centuries. "Summon them all, and Arthur. Make sure the notice specifies it is being called by the majority shareholder, by E.M. Holdings. I did not go home. I could not. The penthouse in Back Bay, with its sweeping views and floor-to-ceiling glass, had ceased to be my sanctuary. It was just a beautifully decorated cage where I had been gaslighted and betrayed. The thought of walking in, of finding Marcus there waiting to talk, which really meant waiting to yell at me until I apologized for his affair, was suffocating. Instead, I drove to the Four Seasons. The valet knew me by sight, a flicker of confusion in his eyes as I pulled up, not in the usual chauffeured car, but in my own coupe, alone. I didn't care. I checked into a deluxe suite overlooking the garden, using my personal credit card. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the silence was absolute. It was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I walked over to the windows and looked out at the lights of the city, my father's city. I took out my company-issued phone, the one Marcus had publicly ordered me to surrender. I powered it off and dropped it into the hotel safe, next to my passport. It was a symbolic gesture. I was locking that part of my life away. My personal phone, however, was buzzing incessantly on the desk. The screen lit up, a steady, frantic rhythm. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. He called 6 times, one right after the other. Then the texts started. Eliza, where are you? This is absurd. Come home. I know you're upset, but you don't walk out on me like that. We need to talk. Stop being dramatic. Pick up the phone. I watched the messages appear, one after another, each one a small burst of his arrogance and confusion. He wasn't worried about me. He was angry that I had deviated from his script, that I wasn't home to be punished and then forgiven. I silenced the phone. I did not turn it off. I ran a scalding hot bath. While the tub filled, I ordered room service the most expensive oyster soup on the menu and a bottle of Sancerre. I let the bath steam up the mirrors until the entire room was a warm, fragrant cloud. I sank into the water and did not move for an hour. I ate my soup in a plush hotel robe, savoring every bite. And then I went to bed. For the first time in 6 months, I fell asleep instantly, a deep, heavy, and peaceful sleep. Across town, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Marcus was pacing the living room of the penthouse, his anger mounting with every unanswered call. He couldn't believe her audacity. He had suspended her, publicly shamed her, and she was the one not answering the phone. He dialed Sloane, needing to vent. She's not here, he snapped, loosening his tie. Can you believe her? She just disappeared. Sloane's voice was a low, confident purr. Oh, darling, don't worry about it. She's just having a tantrum. She's probably crying at her sister's house. It's what she does. She's emotional. You did what you had to do. You were strong. Marcus let out a breath, allowing Sloane's certainty to calm him. You're right. She'll get it out of her system and be back in a day or two, apologizing for making this harder than it needed to be. Exactly, Sloane said. Forget about her. I'm already handling it. I just sent an email to the entire marketing division, letting them know I'll be temporarily supervising all of Eliza's strategic accounts. To ensure continuity, someone has to be the adult. Marcus smiled. Good, that's perfect. Show them what real leadership looks like. At 9 p.m., Marcus was sitting in his home office, nursing a whiskey, his confidence fully restored. He was clearing out his inbox when a new email arrived. It was from a law firm he didn't recognize. The sender was Arthur Davenport. He frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar. He opened the message. The subject line was formal and jarring. Notice of emergency board meeting, convened by majority shareholder E.M. Holdings. Marcus stared at the words, his brow furrowed. E.M. Holdings. He had to rack his brain. He'd seen the name years ago, during the transition after David Shaw's death. It was the holding company. The legal shell corporation that held Eliza's 51% stake. He had always assumed it was just a passive trust, a formality for tax purposes. He, as CEO, held the proxy voting rights for those shares. convened by the majority shareholder. He scoffed. He assumed it must be a mistake. Or perhaps some outside investment group had bought a tiny piece of the company and was trying to make trouble. He wasn't worried. He controlled the board. He controlled the company. He controlled Eliza's shares. He laughed, shaking his head at the bureaucratic hassle. He didn't even register the initials. E.M. He had long since forgotten what they stood for. He closed his laptop, annoyed but unbothered, utterly blind to the fact that he had just received a formal declaration of war. I woke before my alarm, my mind sharp and lucid after a night of true, uncomplicated rest. I dressed with deliberate care. This was not a day for the soft cashmere and muted tones of Eliza Vance, head of client relations. This was a day for armor. I chose a midnight blue Armani pantsuit, tailored so sharply it could have cut glass. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe chignon. My heels were high, my makeup flawless, my expression utterly neutral. At 8:50 a.m., I walked into the lobby of Aperture Dynamics. The receptionist, a young woman named Chloe, looked up from her screen. Her professional smile froze, then dissolved into pure panic. She had seen the email about my suspension. "Mrs. Vance," she stammered, half rising from her chair. "I apologize. I was not expecting you. I cannot let you up." She reached a trembling hand toward the security phone, her eyes wide with distress. "That will not be necessary. Chloe." Arthur Davenport, looking imposing in a dark, three-piece suit, stepped forward from the Blacktown car I had arrived in. He was flanked by two young, grim-faced lawyers who looked like they ate contracts for breakfast. Both carried heavy, leather briefcases. Arthur placed his hand on the reception desk. "Mrs. Vance is here with us for the 9 a.m. board meeting." Chloe's hand froze over the phone. A board meeting. Her gaze snapped from Arthur to the lawyers, and then to me. I was standing perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me. I gave her a single, cold nod. "Of course, Mr. Davenport," she whispered, her voice strained. She pressed the button to unlock the executive elevator bank. "Go right ahead." We stepped into the elevator. The polished steel doors slid shut, reflecting 3 solemn faces and 1 composed, empty mask. Mine. Meanwhile, on the 40th floor, chaos reigned. Marcus Vance was pacing the length of the boardroom, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. His suit felt tight, the knot of his tie constricting his airway. He had been on the phone since 7 a.m., trying to get answers from the other 3 members of his board. "What do you mean? Who are they?" he had shouted at Jim, one of the venture capitalists he had personally brought in. "You are on the board. Find out." Jim had been just as agitated. "Marcus, I am telling you, I have never heard of E.M. Holdings. How does an unknown entity get the authority to call an emergency meeting? Are you letting an outside shareholder stage a coup? This makes us all look weak. Marcus, it makes you look weak." He had hung up and immediately called Carol. The chief financial officer, Carol, a pragmatic woman in her late 60s who had been my father's most trusted executive, was maddeningly calm. "I just know what the email said." "Marcus," she'd replied, her voice flat. "It's an emergency meeting called by the majority shareholder. I plan to be there at 9. Now." The board members were filing in, their faces a mixture of annoyance and confusion. "Marcus, you need to get this under control," Jim said, throwing his coat onto a chair. "This is a circus." "It is a misunderstanding," Marcus insisted, rubbing his temples, where a vicious headache was pulsing. "It is a procedural error. Some dusty old trust fund managed by some geriatric lawyer. It is a shakedown, that is all. I will handle it." He was trying to project command, but his stomach was churning. He was rattled. He had tried to call Eliza at least 20 times. Her phone went straight to voicemail. She had not come home. That deviation from the script, her failure to come home and fight, was unsettling him more than the meeting itself. The boardroom door hissed open. Marcus looked up, expecting Arthur Davenport. It was Sloane. She was not on the board. She had no security clearance for this floor, let alone this room. She sauntered in as if she owned the place, wearing a bright red dress that clung to her curves, holding 2 lattes from the downstairs cafe. She completely ignored the confused looks from the other board members and Carol's quiet, assessing stare. "Don't worry, darling," she purred, walking straight up to Marcus. She placed one of the lattes on the table in front of him. "You will handle this. You always do. Just be the shark they know you are." And then, right there, in the main boardroom, in front of the entire executive leadership, she stood on her toes, wrapped a hand around the back of his neck, and kissed him. It was not a chaste peck. It was a full, lingering, proprietary kiss on the mouth. Marcus, his mind racing, trying to calculate the angles of a meeting he could not understand, barely registered the act. He was already looking past her, toward the door, his mind consumed by the threat to his power. He just nodded, taking the coffee. "Right," he muttered. "Right. I just need to figure out what their angle is." He was so panicked by the meeting, so blinded by his own arrogance, that he did not even notice the breathtaking recklessness of his lover. He did not see the look of pure, cold disgust that flashed across Carol's face before she looked back down at her papers, her expression unreadable. 9 a.m. On the dot. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom hissed open. Marcus was at the head of the table, his back to the entrance, attempting to project an authority he clearly did not feel. He was running a hand through his hair, his voice strained. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. I know this is an inconvenience. Now, regarding this so-called E.M. Holdings, Mr. Vance?" Arthur Davenport's voice cut through the room like a judgment. It was not loud, but it held an absolute, ancient authority that made Marcus freeze mid-sentence. Marcus turned slowly. His eyes widened, first in confusion at seeing the elderly lawyer, and then in irritation. "Mr. Davenport." "I wasn't aware you were on the agenda." Arthur stepped fully into the room, followed by his 2 stone-faced junior lawyers. He did not respond. He simply moved to the side, holding the door open. And then I walked in. I moved past Arthur, my heels clicking with sharp, measured precision on the granite floor. The sound was deafening in the suddenly silent room. Every head turned. The 2 other board members, Jim and Robert, stared, their mouths slightly open. Carol, the CFO, simply lifted her gaze from her papers and watched me, her expression unreadable. Sloane, still lingering by Marcus's elbow, let out a short, sharp laugh of contempt. "Oh my God," she sneered, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "She's actually desperate. This is just sad." Marcus's face, however, had gone from confused to a dark, mottled red of pure rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Eliza, what the hell are you doing here? I suspended you. You are trespassing. Security." He bellowed toward the intercom. "Get security up here, now." I did not stop walking. I did not look at him. I did not look at his mistress. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Vance," Arthur Davenport said calmly. His associates were already moving, placing thick, spiral-bound documents at each board member's seat. They placed the thickest one directly in front of Marcus's trembling hands. "I represent E.M. Holdings." "You represent a trust fund," Marcus snapped, swatting the document away as if it were a fly. "Now get her out of my boardroom." "I am not in your boardroom, Marcus," I said. It was the first time I had spoken. My voice was calm, clear, and cold. It resonated in the air, silencing his tirade. I had reached my destination. The only empty chair at the table was the large, leather high-backed chair at the opposite end, the chairman's seat, a seat that had remained symbolically empty since my father died. I did not sit. I placed my hands on the back of it, claiming it. I looked down the long, polished expanse of the table, past the shocked faces, to my husband. And I Gentlemen, I announced, my voice filling the room. MEM Holdings. A few of the men blinked, confused. Sloane rolled her eyes. Marcus just looked at me like I was insane. I let the confusion hang in the air for a beat. Eliza, Shaw, Holdings. Silence. Jim and Robert exchanged a baffled look. My father's company, I continued, which he left to me. The 51% controlling interest you've all been voting on my behalf for 7 years. Marcus let out a strangled laugh. Eliza, you're delusional. You're grieving. You don't know what you're talking about. I hold the proxy. I control those shares. You did, Arthur corrected, his voice sharp. At that moment, Carol, the CFO, who had been ignored by Marcus and Sloane, finished flipping through the first few pages of the document Arthur's team had provided. A slow, thin smile spread across her face. It was a smile of profound, long overdue satisfaction. She looked up, met my eyes across the room, and gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. I turned my full attention back to Marcus, who was now staring at Carol's smile with dawning horror. Thank you all for attending the emergency meeting, I said, my voice dropping into the formal cadence of a chairperson. The meeting I called. Marcus's face was a mask of waxy, pale disbelief. The blood had drained from it, leaving him looking sallow and old under the expensive boardroom lighting. No, he stammered, shaking his head, trying to muster his CEO bluster. No, that is not possible. It is a trust fund. It is a legal shell. Eliza, you do not have voting rights. I hold the proxy. The board bylaws clearly state. You had the proxy rights, Mr. Vance. Arthur Davenport's voice was not loud, but it sliced through Marcus's frantic rambling, silencing him instantly. Arthur stood, a figure of absolute, immovable law. You had them, to be precise, until 10:32 a.m. yesterday morning. Marcus flinched. The exact moment, the exact time he had stood on that stage and suspended me. Arthur placed his hands on the table. He was addressing the entire board now, but his words were a surgical dissection aimed only at Marcus. When my client's father, David Shaw, structured this company 7 years ago, he did not create a simple trust fund. He created a fortress. He put in place a specific binding provision in the E.M. Holdings Charter. He called it, quite plainly, the disloyalty clause. Arthur let the name hang in the air. The clause, he continued, his voice resonating with the dry rasp of legal text, stipulates that the CEO's proxy voting rights for the E.M. Holdings shares are contingent upon his unwavering fiduciary duty, not just to the corporation, but to the intent of the founder. The moment you, Mr. Vance, used your executive authority to suspend Ms. Vance, the founder's heir and the company's principal, without just cause and in violation of corporate procedure, you breached that duty. That is not true, Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. It was a valid complaint from a department head. A complaint, Arthur countered, which we have ample evidence to prove was not a legitimate business decision, but a transparent maneuver to cover for your own personal misconduct. You used company resources to protect your subordinate, Ms. Garrett, with whom you are involved, at the direct expense of this company's stability and reputation. Arthur looked up over his glasses, his gaze sweeping across the stunned board members. You violated the terms of your own employment agreement, Mr. Vance, and in doing so, you triggered the disloyalty clause. As of 10:32 a.m. yesterday, your proxy vote was rendered null and void. The full, unrestricted voting power of the 51% majority stake immediately and automatically reverted to its sole owner, Eliza Shaw Vance. The color drained from Sloane's face. Her entire future, her protection, her power. It was all built on Marcus. And Marcus was collapsing. Marcus, she whispered, her voice suddenly high and thin. the arrogant purr completely gone. She grabbed his arm. "Marcus, say something. Tell them they are wrong." But Marcus did not hear her. He was frantically flipping through the pages of the document in front of him, his hands visibly shaking. The slick corporate legalese suddenly an alien language he could not decipher. Sweat beaded on his forehead, glistening under the lights. He looked trapped. "This is a joke," he said, his voice hoarse. He looked up, his eyes wild, appealing not to the board, but to me, to his wife. "Eliza, stop this. This is insane. You are destroying our company. Everything we built together." So the appeal to our history, the attempt to gaslight me one last time, died in the cold, still air. The woman he was speaking to, the sentimental wife he had dismissed, was gone. I looked at him, not with the pain of a spouse, but with the cold fury of an owner. My voice was even, devoid of the emotion he was trying to provoke. "No, Marcus, you are destroying my father's company." I stood up straight, pushing the heavy chairman's chair back slightly. I finally, fully, took my place at the head of the table. "I am here to save it." I looked around at the stunned faces of the board. "We have a lot to get through. I have 2 motions to bring to a vote today." My gaze shifted from my husband's pale, sweaty face to the woman standing beside him, Sloane Garrett. She was still clinging to Marcus's arm, her crimson-painted nails digging into the sleeve of his expensive suit, her knuckles white. Her entire posture had changed from one of proprietary arrogance to that of a cornered animal. I did not speak to Marcus. I spoke to the board. "Motion the first," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned silence. I looked directly at Sloane. "The immediate termination of Ms. Sloane Garrett, for cause." "You cannot be serious!" Sloane spat, her voice losing its cultured edge and turning sharp and nasal. "You're suspended. You can't fire me." "I am proposing a motion as the majority shareholder," I said, my voice cutting across hers. "The termination is for cause, based on gross misuse of company funds, behavior detrimental to the reputation of Aperture Dynamics, and actions constituting a severe breach of her employment contract." As I spoke, one of Arthur's young lawyers stepped forward and placed a new, thinner file in front of each board member. It was not a legal charter, it was a stack of expense reports. "What is this, Jim?" one of the VCs demanded, picking it up with distaste. "That," Carol, the CFO, said, her voice clear and strong, "is what I have been trying to bring to the board's attention for weeks." She looked at Marcus with undisguised contempt. "Those are the expense reports for Ms. Garrett's emergency business trips to Chicago and Austin. You will find itemized receipts for hotel suites, not standard rooms. You will find $200 bottles of champagne charged to the company. You will see room service bills for 2, every single night. I flagged these expenditures personally. Mr. Vance overrode my objections, claiming they were critical client entertainment." "Those are private," Sloane shrieked, finally letting go of Marcus to lunge for the papers. "You have no right. That is my personal information." "They are receipts you submitted for reimbursement from my company," I stated, my voice as cold as the grave. "They are company property. And this board has every right to review them." Sloane looked at Marcus, her eyes wide with panic. "Marcus, stop her. This is a violation. It's harassment." Marcus was mute. He was staring at a copy of the expense report, at a dinner receipt for 2. Dated on a weekend he had told me he was attending a solo conference. He looked pathetic. I did not wait for him. I had the floor. "We are voting," I said. "All in favor of the immediate termination of Sloane Garrett, for cause—" I raised my right hand, high and steady. "Aye," Carol said, her voice ringing with satisfaction as she raised her own hand. Jim and Robert, the other 2 members, looked at each other. They looked at Marcus, who was frozen. Then they looked at me. They were businessmen. They knew how to count. They knew what 51% meant. It meant the vote was already decided. Reluctantly, resentfully, but undeniably, they both raised their hands. "The motion carries," I announced, the words like a gavel strike. 4-0. Ms. Garrett's employment is terminated, effective immediately. Her corporate accounts are already locked. I turned my gaze fully on Sloane. The color had drained from her face, leaving her red lipstick looking garish and clownish. "Security is waiting for you outside this room," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "You will be escorted from the building. Do not stop at your desk. Your personal effects will be cataloged and mailed to whatever address you provide." "No," she whispered. It was a pathetic sound. "No. Marcus," she screamed, rounding on him. "Marcus, do something you promised me. You promised me you would handle her." She grabbed the front of his suit jacket, shaking him. "Say something, you useless coward. Say something." Marcus flinched away from her touch, his eyes still glued to the papers. He could not look at her. He could not look at me. He had built his entire identity on being the man in charge, and in the span of 10 minutes, he had been reduced to a non-entity in his own boardroom. "Marcus!" Sloane shrieked again, her voice cracking into a desperate sob. The glass doors opened. 2 uniformed security guards, men I had known for a decade, stepped inside. They did not look at me or the board. They looked only at Sloane. "Ms. Garrett," the first guard said, his voice polite but firm. "Will you please come with us?" "Get your hands off me," she yelled as they each took an arm. "You can't do this. I will sue you. I will sue all of you. You have no idea who I am." She was still screaming as they pulled her from the room, her threats echoing down the hallway. "This is not over. Eliza Marcus, you bastard. This is not over." The doors clicked shut. The boardroom was plunged back into a profound, ringing silence. The air was thick with adrenaline and shock. Jim and Robert were staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Carol sat with her hands folded, her expression grimly satisfied. Marcus stood alone, abandoned in the center of the room. He looked hollowed out, the arrogant veneer stripped away, leaving only the weak, panicked man underneath. He stared at the door where Sloane had vanished, his chest heaving. Then, slowly, his eyes found mine. He took a shaky step, raising his hands, not in anger, but in a pathetic gesture of surrender. His voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its baritone authority, reduced to a desperate, hoarse whisper. "Eliza, okay, okay. You won. You won." He attempted a smile. It was a horrifying twitch of muscles that did not obey. "She's gone. See, I got rid of her. She's gone. We're good." He took another step. "So we can stop this now. This theater. It's done. You've made your point, and it's a strong one. I get it. Now, please, let's sit down. Let's talk. Just us. We can fix this. We can fix this." I watched him. I watched this man who had publicly humiliated me, who had gaslighted me in my own home, who had tried to steal my father's legacy while sleeping with my replacement. I looked for the man I had married, and he was not there. All I felt was a vast, cold pity. It was the feeling one has for something that must be put out of its misery. "We are not talking, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet, cutting through his desperate plea. "We are voting." His face froze. The pathetic hope vanished, replaced by a dawning, sickening terror. I turned to the board, my posture radiating the authority of the chair I stood behind. "Motion the second," I announced, my voice ringing with the clarity of a death knell. "The immediate removal of Marcus Vance from the position of Chief Executive Officer and his removal from the Board of Directors of Aperture Dynamics, effective immediately." A small, strangled gasp escaped Marcus's lips. "This motion," I continued, "is for cause, citing gross violation of fiduciary duty, severe corporate mismanagement, and personal conduct that has actively and willfully endangered the financial stability and reputation of this company. Eliza, no, he finally yelled, his voice cracking. No, you can't. You're joking. You're not serious. He looked around the room, appealing to the men who had been his allies. She's not serious. You can't run this company without me. I am the face of this company. The market will collapse. I built this. You were the face. Marcus, I said, my voice slicing through his hysteria. I am the foundation, and you just proved that the face cannot be trusted with my father's house. I did not wait for him to sputter another defense. I had the floor. I had the power. I call the vote, I said, looking at the board. All in favor of the immediate removal of Marcus Vance. I raised my hand high. Aye. Marcus's head snapped to Carol. She was his only hope for a protest, for an ally. Carol looked him dead in the eye, her gaze filled with 7 years of compressed disgust. Aye, she said, her voice clear and strong. She raised her hand. 51%, plus Carol's stake. It was done. Marcus looked wildly at Jim and Robert. Jim, you're going to let her do this. After everything we built, Robert. Jim and Robert just stared at the polished mahogany table. They were venture capitalists. They knew a losing bet when they saw one. They knew the vote was over. The motion is passed, I declared into the crushing silence. Marcus Vance is hereby removed as CEO and as a member of this board, effective immediately. His system access is already revoked. Marcus slumped, grabbing the back of a chair to steady himself. He looked like he had been physically struck. Eliza, please, he whispered. I ignored him. I looked at Arthur, who was standing impassively by the door. Arthur, please escort Mr. Vance from the building. He is trespassing. You can't, Marcus breathed, shaking his head. Ben, my assistant, will coordinate with security to have your personal effects from your office and the penthouse boxed and delivered to a location of your choosing. You are not to re-enter this building. Ever. I picked up my single folder and slid it into my briefcase. I looked at the stunned, silent men. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you for listening to my story. Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to connect and share our thoughts. Remember to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give extra support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.